Every now and then, I like to recreate an old classic. Maybe it's because I'm a bit of an old classic myself. My next recipe includes an ingredient that was common in medieval times, but it's making a comeback.
My next recipe is a pie using one of those legendary food combinations, pork and apple. But I want to add something different to give it an extra punch. I've been told of a magical medieval ingredient that fits the bill, and there are just a few people who still make it. This is Richard Purton, one of the very few producers in Britain making this unusual ingredient that's got so many chefs excited. So what exactly is it?
Verre jus is the juice of any unripe fruit that is used in cooking.
Biting into unripe fruit tastes sour and acidic, but this flavour, known as verre jus, was popular in kitchens for centuries. However, as the world developed, it was replaced and forgotten.
The reason that verre jus fell out of popularity was because there were loads of lemons and limes around, and they were coming from all over the world, so people could get sourness anyway. Also, vinegar had been invented and perfected, so there was a lot of vinegar around, and there was just no need to go scrubbing around in orchards looking for fallen fruit anymore. The main difference between the verre jus that I make and the one that's made in France and a lot of other places in the world is that I make mine out of underripe apples, and they use grapes.
In 2010, Richard decided to bring back verre jus to the British kitchen.
I started making verre jus just from the fruit in my back garden, so I hit upon the idea of just trying a small batch commercially. And then I had the idea, well, I'll just see what other chefs think of this. So I took it round to a few local restaurants, and it was very successful. So the following year I made a bit more, and so on. Verre jus can be used for all sorts of cooking. It's fantastic in savoury dishes with pork, oily fish, duck, even in vegetarian dishes. And it's wonderful on desserts. You can concentrate it down and drop it on desserts. You can use it to add even more appliness to apple pie. You can make a fantastic sorbet out of it.
Today, Richard has come to Brogdale, home of the National Fruit Collection, to seek inspiration for a new blend of verre jus. He's going to concoct a unique infusion, especially for my pork and apple pie. Richard combines 3 flavours of apple to make his verre jus. 1 aromatic, 1 sweet, and 1 acidic.
I'm going to start off with the acidic juice because that is the one that I know is going to form the main part of the verre jus. The next most important one really isn't the sweetness, but the aromatic one. And finally, the sweet one. We don't want too much of that because it's going to turn that into more like an apple juice. That should be about right now, so have a little taste. Oh, that's it. The acidity is really coming through well now. And I think that's just about the perfect verre jus.
Once he's got his base sorted, Richard could then experiment with other unripe fruit flavours.
You can smell ripe blackberries in there, but it has got sort of a sharp, leafy backdrop.
Blackberry isn't right for my pork and apple pie, but sage will complement the ingredients perfectly. So, Richard's preparing a sage-infused apple verre jus just for me.
I'm going to chuck the whole bottle in. I'm going to put the lid on this, put it in the fridge overnight. With fingers crossed, it'll make a really good apple and sage verre jus, which will be perfect for Paul.
I've never come across verre jus before, but I can't wait to give it a whirl in my pie.
I had no idea what verre jus was. Apparently it's been around for a long, long time.
Yeah, well, it sort of originated way back in Mesopotamia. In fact, they still use it a lot in the Middle East, and it's called huzrun.
So which one do you recommend that we try here?
Well, in order to taste it, first of all, I would just start off with just the plain verre jus. Okay. And then you can try the sage one if you like, to see if the sage levels are going to be right for your dish.
So you wouldn't normally have this as a drink? This is an addition to something, a sauce or...
Yeah, you use it instead of lemon juice or vinegar in a sauce or in a dressing.
Can I have a little taste then, please? So it was really when lemons and limes came around from abroad that this whole thing became, well, not obsolete, but it certainly quietened down and then died away slowly.
Yeah, because before that, the need to get sour things into cooking was such that, you know, there was only really vinegar and lemons for a short period in certain parts of Europe when they were in season.
Straight away you can tell it's apple. Certainly the aftertaste tells you what it is. But you've got this very peppery flavour to it, the sharpness to it as well. And it does sort of dance around your tongue quite a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's a bit of grassiness there as well from the greenness of the apples.
So this is the one you've made to go in the pie, actually, the sage and apple. Can I try a little bit of this one, please?
Yeah. I mean, I thought that the sage in there might actually reinforce the sage that you're putting in the pie anyway.
Probably could, actually. It's an apple juice, but it reminds me of something with that sage gone in it. It's a very rounded flavour with the sage in it. Right, I'm going to show you how to do a dish. So what I'm going to do is do a pork and apple pie, but I'm using a very different type of pastry.
To start my pie filling, I've sweated off some diced onions and celery until soft. I then put the softened vegetables aside and melt some butter with a splash of oil in the same pan.
Pork and apple's a marriage made in heaven, isn't it?
I mean, the good thing, particularly about the sharpness of this apple, is that it cuts through any of the oil that might be in the pork, any of the fat in the pork, and balances it out perfectly.
Next, sear the chunks of pork in hot butter and oil.
Now, these are browning off nicely. I love pork. Pork's one of my favourites.
So what cut of pork are you using in this?
It's shoulder.
Once the pork has been browned, return the onion and celery mixture to the pan. Next, add some flour to the pan to coat the meat, which will also help thicken the sauce later.
Beautiful. Then I'm going to have my cider and chicken stock. The smell of this is incredible. If you haven't got any veggies then, what do you think you'd add to this?
Well, you can use apple juice. Try and find a sharp apple juice. If you can find a Bramley, you know, you can buy single variety apple juices in a lot of farm shops. If you can find a Bramley juice, use that. And if you want to sharpen it up a bit still, because the verjuice is actually sharper than the Bramley, just add a small amount of lemon to it.
Now, roughly chop the apples. I'm using a mixture of Cox's and Bramley apples. The Bramley apples will break down as they cook, whereas the Cox's will keep some of their bite.
Add your apple and sage to this beautiful mixture. Give it a bit of a stir.
Cook this mixture down for 45 minutes. Allow to cool and pop it in the fridge to chill.
Let's run through the pastry ingredients. This is unusual.
Adding the cider and the olive oil first, I'm putting in the ingredients the wrong way around.
Egg, straight in. Swish this up a little bit.
I add baking powder and 3/4 of the flour and mix thoroughly.
This is really odd. Because you're adding so much olive oil to this, the pastry actually looks a bit like a hot water crust pastry. It's a strange one, this one. Now add the rest of the flour. Stir this around.
When the dough has come together, turn it out and fold a couple of times.
And the whole pastry feels quite buoyant, quite alive. And you can see the way it breaks up there with the little bubbles in it.
Chill the dough in the fridge for 10 minutes, then rest at room temperature for 5 minutes, and the pastry is ready to roll.
There you have it. The pastry's almost sweating with the amount of olive oil in there.
Break off a small piece and roll into a long, thin strip to form the rim of the pie.
And this will help the lid bind to this when you put it in the oven. There you go. Now I've got my mix here. It has been cooled and is ready to go inside, but I'm also going to add, this is the sage and apple verjus. Give it a little bit of a mix round together. I'm really looking forward to this dish. This floats my boat, this. Pork and apple. Ooh, come here. Get a spoon. Now what you've got to do is keep that funnel in the middle and just put your ingredients in around that funnel. Try and keep it as central as possible. Ooh, yes. The funnel is a very ancient way of making a pie. You had the funnel sticking out at the top. It's just to let the steam out to allow it to come out. Some people now just pierce it, but it's a very old-fashioned way of baking. Very British in its approach. Now I'm going to get a little bit of flour, roll out the pastry for the lid. Right. Keep on moving it. The olive oil has made it quite a tough old pastry, this. I don't mean tough as in chew. It just means it's quite robust. You can be quite, you know, rough with it. Bring over your pie, place the lid over the top.
Cover the pie with a rolled out pastry and make a hole for the funnel.
Get a knife, cut round, and then all you do, a little bit of crimping around the outside, fingers in again, just push it together, go all the way around the outside. There you have it. A very beautiful looking pie.
Before baking, brush the top of the pie with a beaten egg and bake at 200 degrees Celsius for 30 to 35 minutes.
I've got one in here that's been cooking for about that time now. Look at that.
It's fantastic.
That smells absolutely gorgeous. Now that is a proper pork and apple cider pie with sage and apple verjus. Verjuice, if you're in Kent. We're going to have to wait a little bit longer before we get a chance to try it, but thank you very much for bringing this in.
Thanks very much. It's good to watch you make it.
My pork and apple pie is a match made in heaven, and the addition of the verjus elevates it to a whole new level. Earlier, Tom Kerridge made me a bread and butter pudding, a dish he lent from his mum. Now, he's got a surprise for me. It's a letter from my mum.
And this is some recipes from your mum.
For my mum.
From your mum.
It's instructions for my next baking challenge.
Jam tart, she's written terribly difficult, you do the grams, she's written all in ounces.